Over here. We're live. All right, welcome back, everybody, to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It is Thursday, February 26th, and we are here to take testimony on H727, an act relating to sustainable data center deployment. We're going to hear from VPIRG, and we are going to hear from VNRC. We're going to hear from the Lake Champlain Committee. And we have until lunchish. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury. Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2. Chris Morrow, Windsor Bennington. Michael Philadelphia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Great. And in the room,
Dana Lee Perry, Dinner Crescent Group.
Michael Epicella, Sterling College.
Serena Knight, VNRC.
Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee.
Then Julie Walsh with VPIRG.
Nathaniel Eisen, Phoenix Journalist.
James Maloney, Media, NBC5 News, WPTC.
Super. All right. Who's first? Beth?
Me. Trying to join the Zoom.
Okay.
Morning. For the record, Ben and Julie Walsh with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I'm going to join this audio because nobody wants feedback. And great. Thank you again for the opportunity to come in and speak to the issue of data centers and how, if and how Vermont should be regulating them. Obviously, this is an incredibly rapidly emerging area and one with potentially incredibly significant impacts to the state in terms of water, in terms of energy, in terms of toxics. My wheelhouse is energy, so that's what I'll be speaking to. I won't be getting into water or toxics or Act 250. I will say I'm not sure to what degree the other witnesses will be able to get into the issue of toxics, but it is certainly something that should be considered. And we could potentially bring additional testimony or recommendations on that after the time of break, if that's of interest to the committee. So I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about scale. We often hear that data centers are very large. I mean, physically, they take up a lot of space, but in terms of the energy footprint of a data center, and I wanted to try to get my head around that a little bit more. And I thought that would be helpful for the committee as well. And so what I did was I pulled together a couple of examples from legislation, the 20 megawatt data center that's represented in H727 on the left. And then here is the Senate bill, the 100 megawatt data center, that's the moratorium bill. I also did a little bit of research on, how big is a typical data center these days. And the Boston Consulting Group came out with analysis that said right now they're about 40 megawatts on average, with obviously many larger and many smaller. And that number is growing so fast that it'll be 60 megawatts by 2028. Now, I didn't dive deeply into what's included and what's not. Certainly there are some older style data centers that are much smaller. I don't know if that's included in that analysis. The point isn't 60 is a magic number so much as 20 megawatts is not a large data center in the scheme of things as this technology evolves. So just from left to right quickly, 20 megawatts in this bill, 60 megawatts national average as per the Boston Consulting Group. The green bar here is the total electric usage annually for all customers in the Vermont Electric Co-op territory. So roughly the same as a typical data center will be in a couple of years.
Wow.
100 megawatt data center, that's the Senate bill. 450 megawatt, this is a data center that's been proposed. It is planned. Seems like it will be built in, I think it's Lansing, New York. That would be 2,800 megawatts, or essentially half of all the electric usage in the state of Vermont. That's the largest one I could find that had been proposed for the Northeast. I should note, I didn't put on here because it seems like it's a little bit iffy whether it's going to actually land to be built, but there has been a 150 megawatt data center proposed in Massachusetts, which obviously would be sort of between those two sizes. All of Vermont's electric usage is here on an annual basis. I should note that's retail sales. The total amount of electricity that's sort of purchased by Vermont utilities is a bit higher than that because of line losses and their own use. And this is Meta, formerly Facebook data center that's proposed for Louisiana. That is, as you can see, about 3 times the total electric usage of the entire state of Vermont on one campus.
Oh, Rep. Sibilia.
I'm going to try and restrain myself from asking a lot of questions because this looks like it's going to be pretty rich. Thank you, Ben. But planned, is that just kind of they've gotten themselves in the queue, or are they actually like permitting and engaged in the process?
More the latter. I didn't dive deeply on exactly where each of these is, but this 2,000 megawatt one, for instance, is one that Mark Zuckerberg talked about as something that is going to happen in an Instagram post.
Okay.
And they put out press releases and such.
Ben, I'm sorry, I know we don't want to bog down, but is there any kind of nexus between the megawatts and the actual size of the building?
Oh, I'm sure there is. I
that-
did not attempt to try to pin that down at all.
Okay.
Yes.
You're so mathy.
I thought about it, but I drew the line somewhere. Land use, not my wheelhouse.
Okay,
So,
okay. Yeah, you said that. All right. Okay.
the other couple of things that I just wanted to mention briefly before I move on to recommendations, this is my one sort of like context slide, is well, there's one other example, and then one sort of point of reference for how these data centers operate that's different than many other loads. So the other point of reference is we often talk about electric vehicles at heat pumps as other things, as like pre-data center a few years ago. Mostly what we were talking about when we were talking about the grid potentially, taking more electricity on in Vermont was EVs and heat pumps. So a 20 megawatt data center is roughly the same electric usage on an annual basis as 35,000 EVs, which is about, I think, twice as many EVs as the state has at this point. And then the last, sorry.
So 20 megawatt equals 35,000 EVs, twice as many as are on the road in this.
Yeah, I didn't double check our current deployment numbers, but it's something like 2x total EV deployment at this point. The other thing that's just important to note about data centers and how they operate that's a little different than most other loads is they have a very high, what's called a load factor. Load factor is essentially a percentage of their theoretical maximum usage. So if you had 100 megawatt load of some kind and it had a load factor of 100%, that would mean that data center, that whatever, is operating at 100 megawatts of usage every hour of the year, never dialing it back at all. If you operated 100% half the year and turned off half the year, you'd be at a 50% load factor. If you were always on 50% and never turned down or up, you'd also be at a 50% load factor. So it can mean different things, but broadly, the higher the number, the more consistently it's operating at or near its capacity. And data centers, Dominion, Virginia put out numbers for real world load factor for the data centers in their territory. That's the territory in the United States with the largest deployment. They're 82%. Duke Energy is planning for 80%. So very close to full capacity all the time. The typical load factor for the grid as a whole in the United States is about 60. I believe ISO New England's a little bit lower than that. And if you're talking about like residential load, it'd be 50% or lower. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are able to turn those down, either through curtailment or energy storage on site at peaks, what you're doing is you're selling more kilowatt hours for the same amount of, use of the system. We have an electric system and grid that is very often not fully utilized. That's intentional. If you can spread the the infrastructure costs over more kilowatt hours, that can drive down electric rates. But you got to be careful when you're talking about that because the potential for peak increase is so significant with this. Vermont's peak electric usage is about 900 megawatts. The peak ever was just over 1100. That was in 2006. And so if you added a single 100 megawatt data center, you're talking about a 10 to 12% increase from one site in Vermont's total peak if you're not curtailing or otherwise dealing with that peak.
And before you leave this,
Yep.
you said this, but I want to make sure I understood. This chart is based on 100%.
No, I'm sorry. I did not say that.
Oh,
All the data center numbers on here, I couldn't find any, Meta is not saying here's how much electricity we expect to use. They're just talking about the total capacity. This is based on that 80%
it's based on a
number, 80, 82. I rounded. These are not very precise numbers.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so I want to get into our thoughts or recommendations on this bill given this context, and then I know you have witnesses on the very important topic of water as well, and I don't want to give them short shrift. So actually, before everyone starts reading that, I should just say, and I apologize for this. Normally, I try to do a red line that's very clearly like page number and all that from the bill is introduced. You have language from TJ Poor from the department, Peter Walk from Efficiency Vermont. And so what I tried to do is sort of merge these concepts into this language, but that means that I can't give you like exactly what I'm proposing you amend. This is just sort of our thoughts on what the language could end up ultimately look like. And the yellow is mostly my language with a little of Mr. Poor and Mr. Walk's pulled it in.
So just making sure I understand, you are attempting to include all versions, that all red lines that are
Or the
proposed.
little chunks that I'm talking about, yes.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was sort of twofold. One, I think, and I'll caveat this in a second, that the contract construct that Mr. Poor brought forward, and I believe the PUC mentioned as well, as opposed to a tariff that could flow into a contract, is a pretty good one. With the caveat that I'm not an attorney and certainly not an attorney with any expertise in contract law. So I would want to talk to some of my colleagues at other organizations that are attorneys to just ground truth. Is there any sort of thing that we're missing here?
And that's a conversation you could have ASAP.
Yes, I've already started with.
Okay.
Yes. The other reason is his language worked fairly well for the concepts that I was thinking about being incorporated. So that's what I'm. Okay. So this is, again, jettisoning the tariff, the large load service equity contract shall, and my suggestion is dropping the language you currently have on the renewable energy standard. In the interest of time, rather than reading all of this, which you have, what I'd like to do is just describe the effect that I'm aiming for, which is for a data center, 100% of all of the power that they're being contracted with would have to be new renewable energy as, meeting the same definitions as in tier 4 of the renewable energy standard. So new renewables, 2010 or later from New England or the immediately adjacent region. And there's two reasons for this. One, from a greenhouse gas standpoint, this is the way that from an energy standpoint, you can get, there's caveats about exactly when the renewables are produced and all that, but essentially get to zero greenhouse gases by requiring all of their electricity to come from new renewables. This is additional renewable energy, not just signing a contract for something that already exists and isn't sort of forcing more renewables to get built.
So I missed the last thing you said. Say that again.
The idea is this language would, like tier 4 of the renewable energy standard, force new renewables to be built in the region.
Okay, so instead of, because what we were talking about yesterday, and I was trying to think this through last night, was I think that in the language that you recommend striking now, it's more like, okay, you're buying your power from a utility. The utility needs to be compliant with the res, and that's it. You're suggesting, I think, a step. I would think in a better direction, which is that is this kind of bring your own power? It needs to be new in state.
It
You
doesn't.
didn't say in state.
I didn't say in-state, and I have a note on that. It's not necessarily bring your own power. It's making sure the utilities are selling them only renewable power. So the idea here is, if you have a data center, that's this slice over here, you have the renewable energy standard, which governs all the electricity in the state. Now the data center comes in and you're saying, oh, that data center needs to be 100% renewable, as per tier 4 of the res, new renewable. That's totally separate. And then the math would be totally separate. The calculation would be separate from the res. The utilities would still have to get to all the numbers in the renewable energy standard, but then the data center itself would have to purchase from the utility and pay fully for 100% new renewable energy. It's a higher standard, to your point, than the renewable energy standard. It requires more renewable energy than the renewable energy standard. But the idea, by notwithstanding the requirements of 30 VSA 8004 and 5, the res, it essentially is saying data centers are in this separate, higher, more stringent category, and everyone else still has to continue along the res as it existed before them.
Okay.
We've got questions.
Okay, well, just I want to speak in support of this concept because of the effect that the proliferation of these large loads is having on the markets, and greenhouse gases and potentially the peak. And so this feels like an important affordability context piece as well, potentially. So I need to continue to understand it, but
Who is next?
So as a practical matter, how would a data center comply with this? How would they know where the electricity is coming from?
So this would be inserted into the provision about the contract they need to sign with the utility. So as I read Mr. Poor's proposal, if data center comes in and they then need to sign a contract with the utility that meets all of these criteria in the bill, the PUC would then need to make sure that contract meets all the criteria in the bill. And so that's how this would be enforced, that they would basically not be able to get power from utilities in Vermont unless they signed a contract that met, among other things, this requirement.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, so some of the electricity that a utility provides or obtains and then provides to customers comes from long-term contract, and some of it comes from the spot market, whatever the system mix is. So presumably the idea here is that then the data center would have to buy RECs to cover that power.
The utility would have to, sort of essentially on their behalf, would have to purchase enough tier 4 eligible RECs to cover all of the, just like the renewable energy standard itself.
Well, the utility has to buy the RECs now.
Yeah.
But in effect, they're passing the cost on to the data center, right?
Yeah, and they would have to buy more RECs than they would under the res as it stands. The renewable energy standard peaks at 40% new renewable energy in 2035, some in-state, some regional. This would say from day one, when the data center comes on, their contract has to be providing essentially RECs or power with RECs for 100% of their power being renewable.
And I don't know if this matters, but I'm trying to understand how a data center or how the utility is going to know where that electron comes from. But
there's contracts for power and RECs just like any other contracts for power.
But
and
it's
RECs.
moment to moment where the power is coming from. Is it not? Maybe this is too much of it.
The last thing I can it's a much bigger conversation. Right now, the way Vermont's renewable energy standard works is it's on an annual basis. And so you're absolutely right. Like the electrons are second to second, millisecond to millisecond.
Yeah.
But the contracts are, and the law reads that it's on an annual basis. And that's this.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. All right.
Follows that annual law.
Right. Thanks.
So this would force the utilities to source new renewable electricity faster than they would have otherwise.
Yes.
And given all the hurdles to building new renewables, one wonders what the effects are going to be.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm worried about the timing issue. And is this going to require, if someone builds a data center, that they leave it turned off until the utility has gone and found developers to build a bunch of solar and wind and stuff?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I'd say a couple of things to that. One, any data center that's being proposed in Vermont certainly would be on a multi-year timeframe between initial proposal and construction. And so there is a fair bit of runway there. Two, these data centers are enormous, but relative to the New England grid as a whole, they are an individual 20 or 100 megawatt data center is not so dramatically changing the total demand for new renewables in New England that it, by our estimation, would be impossible to find that new renewable energy on a few-year timeframe. I mean, you could hear from the utilities, from the department, but that's our take on this.
Thank you.
The other thing I just say briefly on this slide, and I am very aware that I'm running, probably going to run well over 11:30, but tier 2 in-state, that was mentioned. This does not have any language on in-state. I thought a lot about that, and I do have a suggestion for how to deal with it. What I was struggling with is what I just said about the region is not necessarily true for renewable development in Vermont. If you had a 100 megawatt data center come online, you would, and it's like in the out years in the 2030s, and the requirement for tier 2 at that point is like around about 20%. And you had to, over the course of 1 to 3 years, bring online enough new solar for them to get 20% of their power from new solar. That would be about 100 megawatts of new solar. Right now, we're building about 50 megawatts of new solar in the state a year. So you double for a couple of years the amount of solar that needs to be built in the state, and that could drive up prices for everyone. And so simply saying it's 100% new renewable and 20% of that needs to be from in-state tier 2 power seemed like it could have unintended consequences. So my suggestion here, and it's not in the slide, is something like a reasonable and increasing percentage of which must be tier 2 qualifying, something like that, but leaving it up to the PUC to decide exactly what that means on a contract by contract basis. So you are getting some new renewables in the state, but not blowing up the market for tier 2 power in the process. Okay, I have a few more language suggestions. So I think that might be the most complicated. Okay. So that was about renewables. This is about peak and energy efficiency. So this language does a few things. And I should say some of this is language that is essentially pure walks.
I wondered about that. So this incorporates Peter's suggestions.
Yes. So, or at least portions of them. So as well as enhanced energy efficiency standards. So that's Mr. Walk's language. I should say, and I have not had a chance to talk to him about this, which is why I haven't incorporated anything more than this. I'm wondering a little bit here about pointing to specific energy standards, stretch code, something like that. I'm not sure if it's a perfect fit because data centers have such specific requirements, and I'm not really sure how they're incorporated into energy code. But I could imagine this very general language being a little bit too loose. It's a general comment. I'm sorry, I don't have language to propose, but I can work on that. I also added here, including efficient use of waste heat for two reasons. One, as you know, there's been a lot of work in Vermont to develop thermal energy networks. And this is exactly the kind of large source of heat that would be perfect for a thermal energy network. The other reason is the heat from one of these plants is one of the most significant issues with it from both an energy and a water standpoint. So if you were able to have like a closed loop water system that is cooled at another factory that needs a lot of heat and then brought back in, you're potentially for feeding two birds with one seed, as a friend of mine likes to say. So it doesn't get to specifics there, but it speaks to that as a valuable thing to be working on. It requires them to work with an EU and a distribution utility and coordinate with them. And then this piece is new. This is not a language that Mr. Poor or Mr. Walk brought, but speaks to energy affordability and what Rep. Sibilia was talking about in terms of peak. So these measures, this is the language I'm proposing, shall be sufficient to reasonably ensure that load from the data center will not increase Vermont's system peak load or Vermont's peak load coincident with ISO New England system peak load. Essentially what this says is you're bringing a data center and you have to figure out with the utility, the EU, and the PUC some way of making sure that when the grid is at peak demand, you are not requiring electricity from the grid. That could mean you turn off for 4 hours, curtailment. That could mean you have, if you're a 20 megawatt system, you have 20 megawatts of batteries on site that have several hours worth of storage. So you can turn those on, keep on, chugging away as, doing your work as a data center, but you're not pulling electrons from the grid at that moment. The reason that's so important in our view is this is potentially an enormous cost driver. If we have a data center come on and, year over year, our peak goes up 10%, it is very imaginable. That would contribute to additional costs for us paying for regional transmission projects. This is something Vermont's done a lot of work to reduce the cost of, and one of these data centers could instantly overturn years and years of work to reduce Vermont's peak. I will say, Mr. Poor proposed other language to try to ensure that these projects pay their full rate. I think that's great. I think a lot of the proposals that he brought in that regard really strengthen the protections in this bill. I think something very specific like this would go a step further and really make sure that we're not seeing peak go up in Vermont due to development of data centers, which is one of the things that's driving rate up in other places that are seeing a lot of data centers. Three more. One, and this is one point that I strongly disagree with Mr. Poor on, although I like a lot of his other language. He suggested that perhaps the PUC could be given the authority to waive the energy efficiency charge, which funds Efficiency Vermont, and allow a data center to do its own energy efficiency work, a la Global Foundries, the SMEEP program, or something similar to that. There are a few programs similar to that. I do not think the state should be in the business of giving special treatment to new large loads that come in. So what we're suggesting is language that very specifically says they have to pay the energy efficiency charge. It's in law, they should have to pay it anyway, but if we're saying gross receipts tax, which Mr. Poor proposed, I think we should be pointing out that they have to pay the energy efficiency charge as well. And this bottom language is almost entirely just copy paste from Mr. Walk's testimony, except for the tariffs piece is deleted, presuming that you may adopt Mr. Poor's tariff-free construct. But this just says all these various programs we have that give individual companies a little bit of a special carve out. Data centers can't get them. They just have to pay the EEC and they work with the EU, and that's it. And last but not least, Mr. Poor also brought up in his written testimony, I don't remember if it came up in his verbal testimony, the self-managed utility concept. So this is what Global Foundries has. They, I think, are still in the process of leaving Green Mountain Power. They're going to be their own little utility with themselves as their only customer, or nearly their only customer, absent a couple of people who are leasing from them. And when that was proposed by Global Foundries, they had all these interesting interpretations of law that basically said, oh, well, because Vermont law uses things like retail electric provider, we're not going to be a retail electric provider. So we don't need to follow the renewable energy standard. We don't need to do this. We don't need to do that. Now, ultimately, they didn't. They are complying with all Vermont laws. So they have some carve outs. But absent something like this that says you just can't be your own utility, you have to have a contract with some other utility, and that's that. I think a lot of the other work you're doing in this bill could potentially be null and void because the rest of the bill isn't written with a self-managed utility in mind. It's written like the contract language. You have to have a contract with the utility. What if you're not being served by a utility? You don't need to have a contract anymore. Magically, you get out of all of these requirements. So rather than rewriting a whole bunch of existing law and this bill to contemplate what if they're a self-managed utility, just let them be a self-managed utility. They can play by the rules of office. And that is my testimony.
Thanks, Ben. That was really helpful. And I know you've submitted that and it's posted, I think. Great. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. So basically it will be the utility that's gonna have to go out and get the renewable contract. And you're suggesting that they'll be charging that to that.
Yes.
Guys,
Yeah,
the
that's
cost of that contract under their rate, whatever rate.
yeah, whatever they agree to in that contract would need to incorporate the costs of that renewable energy. Yes.
If
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
That's fine. It takes time.
Madam Chair, if it's all right, we will go
Great.
at the same time. Is that's
Water people like to do everything together.
yes, exactly.
Energy people, they fly so.
We don't have specifically, slideshow or anything like that. We have notes, obviously, testimony, and John and I are gonna go back and forth a little bit. For the record, my name is Jared Carpenter. I am an attorney and the water protection advocate for the Lake Champlain Committee, and this is.
I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for Vermont Natural Resources Council. Also, an attorney, worked on water issues for decades.
Yes, just since you don't have a presentation, I would just ask you to be explicit about which version you are talking about. If you are making recommendations, if it's as introduced, or if you're looking at the red line from the.
I think our recommendations are more general.
Okay.
I mean, I looked at the as introduced bill, but I think that
So you're not.
the general would
specific.
apply. Yeah, we have some suggestions for language.
But they could go into any version
Yeah.
because we're dealing with water consumption, which isn't really addressed in any of the versions quite yet. So
Thank you.
committee's discretion of where it would be included, so to speak. John's been working on the water issues for a long time. I've been in this building for 10 years, starting with the Vermont Clean Water Act and then working on water policy sort of all the way through. So this is a new issue for us, just like with everybody else. We're still wrapping our head around it, and we're working on getting some suggestions, and we have some here today. It's very concerning. The size of these data centers, even a small one, uses 300,000 gallons of water a day intake. It evaporates 80%, and then the rest would be discharged as thermal discharge, as wastewater. You would need a fairly decent sized water source. You're not going to put one, I would think, on the Winooski River out here because you'd overwhelm it. So one would think that this would have to go somewhere on the Connecticut River. This committee has discussed the Vernon location where Mont Yankee was potentially, or on Lake Champlain, Lake Memphremagog, Wallace Pond, the Connecticut Lakes, one of our bigger bodies of water, thus it being a concern for the Lake Champlain Committee.
Or groundwater.
Or ground,
Definitely.
we can talk about groundwater as well.
Okay, yesterday we heard discussion from Dr. Wen about these being connected, largely being connected to public.
Yeah, I see
water
that.
systems.
I'd like to submit to the committee. I just didn't have time, but some general good resources, some pretty reputable resources on data centers and water, and they do discuss using public water supplies.
I mean, in Vermont, that would be a challenge,
Right.
except for maybe Lake Champlain, which raises a host of other issues, but it really is, and we have some experience because we've had the cooling issue we've seen with energy plants, right? We've seen it with certainly Vermont Yankee. And we've seen it with biomass facilities in the state. And all the biomass facilities, some have looked at groundwater, most have looked at surface water. None of them have looked at water supplies. And Vermont Yankee was obviously Connecticut River taking the water. And I just want to emphasize the thermal discharges have serious impact, and we learned that with Vermont Yankee. We wrestled with Vermont Yankee, as you know, for decades on a host of issues, including the water discharge issue. And since Vermont Yankee has been closed down, we have seen the fish populations come back in tremendous numbers. And we always had this debate about what was the impact of this thermal pollution. We knew there was an impact, and thermal pollution is in the Clean Water Act. It is in the water quality standards. You need a Clean Water Act federal discharge permit for thermal pollution. And it's just a matter of one of the limits. But it's really incredible to see once we turned off that heat, how the water quality in the fisheries will come back.
So, Mr. Groveman, we're
Yeah.
trying to figure out gaps. So I think you just said that thermal pollution is something that would be considered. Anyway,
They
it's
would
not a
need
gap.
a federal Clean Water Act.
Yeah, this committee yesterday, you kept talking about dual jurisdiction of, would be DPS or PUC. But there's really another, I mean, ANR has jurisdiction over this as well in terms of the water quality impacts, including thermal discharge, the water intakes. There could potentially be, stormwater permitting, shoreland impact permitting. If you're moving earth around, you could have Army Corps permitting. So there'll be a number of reviews of this that are already in place, but we would also, we'll suggest some additional reviews as well.
Right. And you have experience with, so under Section 248, it seems like the bills are, replicating those, the environmental criteria, including incorporating the Act 250 criteria. And with regard to whether it was Vermont Yankee, whether it was, a biomass facility, so you have the A&R permits, but then you still have to go to the PUC, and there's this broader sort of umbrella undue adverse effect on the environment. The permits are used as evidence to address issues, but the PUC, with regard to these energy issues, with regard to thermal pollution, could go further than that. And so we have experience with that, and Act 250 serves the same role. If Act 250 is involved, the A&R permits are evidence, they're strong evidence. They legally create presumptions of compliance with some of the criteria, but the state or other advocates or concerned citizens could say, even though they have the permit, like there are issues not addressed in the permit, and urge the PUC to go further. So we have all that experience with those regulatory processes. Other states don't have Act 250. I don't know others, what the other state citing laws are, like Section 248, but we do have those good sort of umbrella sort of protections, which we have experience using. So that is positive, but you want to make sure that they're in the bill and be explicit about, how they're going to be applied.
Quick question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, okay.
He's made a sound.
I did.
Okay.
I have something to say.
About thermal pollution, and it was interesting what you mentioned about fish populations returning in the Connecticut River. Do you have? I imagine we have data about how much pollution, thermal pollution. How much did the Vermont Yankee raise the temperature in the?
Well, I'm going to give you all that data. Yeah, I don't have those at the top of my head,
Just
but
roughly 2 degrees, 5 degrees, and
I honestly just I don't
Okay.
remember. I didn't look at that, but it was fairly significant, and that was the debate about where is and there's a thermal plume, so it's not just raising the temperature
right.
like at the discharge point.
Yeah.
A lot of the debate was like, well, how far till it dissipates, and there was a lot of debate about that thermal plume, and obviously, Vermont Yankee say, well, it doesn't go that far down,
That's right.
and then the advocates would say David Dean was. You could have David Dean. He's the expert. as a former legislator, he has studied this upside down and sideways. As he was not only the chair, obviously, of the Fish and Wildlife and Water Committee, but he was the Connecticut River waterkeeper. And so, so yeah, so the pollution, and then,
Okay, just,
yeah,
just curious. Thank you.
so, I mean, I think some of our suggestions, so the A&R permitting, so the Federal Clean Water Act thermal permitting, I think, that is pretty set, and they'll have to go through that. But the debates are like, as experienced with the Yankee, there is like, disagreements about how much needs to be done. And so that will, I'm sure, happen if we get a giant data center. Then there is like, where's the water going to come from? If it comes from groundwater, we put in place in 2008 a very stringent groundwater withdrawal permitting program, and we declared groundwater a public trust resource, which I think we're one of 2 states that have done that. And so if you're withdrawing more than basically 50,000 gallons per day of water, and as Jared said, these for cooling is the low end is 300,000 gallons per day, and the high end seems to be 5 million gallons per day. You would need one of these permits, and they're not easy to get. I don't think anyone's tried actually since we put in the law in 2000. It was really set up for water bottling. I don't know if you remember, there was a big issue back at that time in Vermont. There was a Vermont Pure water bottling, and there were a number of other water bottlers that were looking. And so that we haven't had one come in since that law went into effect. So if a data center wanted to use groundwater, that would be a good protection that we have. But Jared could talk to, we're actually, in addition to the Clean Water Act, we're actually developing water withdrawal laws.
We are. It was actually a little timely on our part. So back in 2022, this body passed Act 135. It's an act relating to surface water withdrawals and interbasin transfers. And the thought was along that time is that in times of drought, there would be competition for water, and therefore, water would have to be divided up and allocated between users. So for the past 2 years, surface water users have been required, if they withdraw a certain amount of water, to register and report to DEC. And if you're a farmer, over to AFM, the amount of water you're using to sort of establish a baseline. Rulemaking is going to affect this summer. The rule is supposed to be in effect July 1st of 2026. I think the Rivers program is running a little bit behind in it, but their plan is to have it in place this summer. And it's so I have some notes on it, and it's based on the potential impacts to surface waters and other factors. They have to follow the Vermont water quality standards, and the rules require efficient use and conservation of surface water, establish withdrawal limits based on low flow or drought, and require assessment of reasonable and feasible alternatives to proposed withdrawals. So what they are proposing is that anybody who is going to withdraw water from a surface water, so from a river or lake, is going to have to get a permit if they withdraw above de minimis standard of water. And de minimis is defined as, for water terms, 5% of the 7Q10 flow. 7Q10 drought level is the low flow of a river in drought conditions as the lowest 7-day average flow that occurs once every 10 years. So that's pretty low. So if you draw 5% of that, you're going to have to get a permit in order to withdraw surface waters. You have to meet water quality standards based on the cumulative effects of other withdrawals. So it's not just you, it's everybody else who's withdrawing water around you, because obviously water withdrawals is cumulative. And then, which is key, is you have to provide an alternative analysis of, during drought, an alternative analysis of what your alternative water, what's your backup plan? So if the river gets down to a certain level, or if the lake gets down to a certain level, where are you going to get your backup? Where are you going to get your water from? And this is something that Ben touched on about, which, this is, John and I are still learning about this, but if the river drops to a certain level, like it did last August, can you turn these things off? I mean, can you just sort of turn a data center off and it doesn't get its water anymore? Because you're going to have to meet the other priority uses of the designated uses of the river, which is public water supply, aquatic habitat, different forms of recreation. There are in rule certain qualifications called designated uses that have to be met This would not be one of those. So
Is ag one of those?
yes,
I didn't
irrigation,
know that. Okay.
irrigation for crops and other water uses. I think it's the seventh
And
one.
ag is not subject to, to the withdrawal, so they don't need to get a permit.
No, ag doesn't.
They do have to report,
They do.
but they don't have to get a permit. And we want to make sure they are a priority use, as is, water supply for, if it's for drinking water, if it's used, for that. But importantly, this is not in place yet. So the timing, I think, we feel validated. We argued for this a couple of years ago, say, hey, we don't have, so yes, thermal discharge, yes, but like, we don't have a comprehensive, program for withdrawals, unless you go through Act 250. And really is more of an Act 250 issue than Section 248. You wouldn't even question, the withdrawal. So we wanted a comprehensive program and then have the criteria, as Jared described them,
Correct.
to have a rational way to make sure we were looking cumulatively to all the users. And then we had the drought this summer, which sort of proved the point that the government doesn't have rules yet about how to manage those drought situations. So withdrawal.
The bill also the act also has a provision in it that I think would provide precedent for this purpose for large water withdrawals, and that's the interbasin transfers. So what the example was there was that Killington was drawing water off the Ottauquechee River, using it to make snow on Pico. And then that was melting and going into the Otter Creek. It's an interbasin transfer between watershed basins because the Ottauquechee goes into the White River, which goes into the Connecticut River, which goes into Long Island Sound, where Pico melts into the Otter Creek and it goes north into Lake Champlain. So you're taking water out and moving it. And so under this large withdrawal, in order to do this, they had to get what's called a water quality certificate, which is normally associated with the Clean Water Act in 401. But it requires a lot of studies are done. What are the impacts on aquatic habitat going to be? What are the impacts on erosion, on withdrawal, on other uses? This is just something that's standard. It's usually under a FERC standard for dams and other generators of energy that, we would have to figure out how the language would work, but would be a good qualifier to say, if you're going to do this, you would need this volume of water. This isn't some little business that's going to draw off, 500, 600 gallons a day. We're talking an amazing amount of water.
Right.
That
So
would need to be.
So this is a gap in the law.
Correct.
So Vermont Yankee had to get the thermal discharge permit, had to also get this water quality certificate because it was an energy generating facility that was licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So basically, under the Clean Water Act, any facility that is licensed by FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, if you need an Army Corps of Engineer permit, then it triggers the requirement that you get this. It's what Jared described as also this holistic water quality review. So Vermont Yankee had to get its discharge permit. We didn't have a withdrawal permit, but they had to deal with those issues, I guess, under 248 to some extent, and they had to deal with them through this water quality certificate. So one of our ideas is, could we fashion into the law that these data centers would have to essentially meet their criteria for a water quality certificate, even though they don't trigger that review. They wouldn't otherwise trigger the water quality certificate review.
There was one factor that came up yesterday, and I don't know, John and I really haven't had a chance to talk about it, but I think it was TJ that brought up that some of these facilities generate their own power, and then they could sell the excess onto the grid. I think that might trigger a FERC review because they are generating power and putting it out there in the same way, a hydroelectric facility or something else would. But I don't think we'd want to wait for that possibility to happen in order to require this full review. We want it to happen for any data center, no matter if they're drawing off the grid or creating their own power.
I want to clarify. So you're suggesting that we would include in the bill the language of the type of review that would be necessary if they were subjected to
Exactly right.
review.
Exactly.
As well as every other A&R, your standard A&R permits for stormwater and wastewater discharge and thermal and everything else. This would be the belt and suspenders version.
Yeah, this would be everything that certainly like Vermont Yankee or even a biomass facility would have to comply with. So just like Jared said, making sure you're checking all the boxes. This, because otherwise, if it's not in the bill, it probably wouldn't apply, except for the circumstance that Jared indicated that it would. And it could be it's a very helpful holistic water quality review. It kind of looks at all of the water quality issues together.
At the end of the day, you're still allowed to withdraw the water.
With
But
conditions.
with conditions.
You know, lots of conditions, and that's a debate about.
It's not part of the typical Act 250
No,
process.
no, it's not.
Or, okay.
So it'll be, I know we talked about this earlier, but, for me, anyway, it would be really important if you guys could submit written testimony that we can.
Yeah, we're
back
like doing
on.
this on the fly, like we said, but so we could work on language, and we did talk, you know, we work with other water groups in the state. We meet every week during the sessions to kind of follow the bills and kind of brainstorm. And something like this comes up, it's very helpful. People have different areas of expertise, so we can work. So I assume you're gonna have town meeting break, and we got something to you next week while you're on break, so we
Yeah,
can shape it a little.
I think the plan is to try to wrap up our, the most immediate, all the kind of foundational testimony this week. And then get comments back to us ASAP so that we can have next week to do a draft.
We're meeting with Maria on Friday,
Yeah.
tomorrow, to try and get the
Okay.
next draft started.
We could, I think, at least give you language. It's a placeholder that we could then tinker with a little bit
Yeah.
over next week. And like I said, it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be reliant on the rest of the bill. This would be sort of, doesn't deal with energy. It would be sort of its own that you could just sort of drop into whatever bill you decide to pursue.
Yeah, whatever choices you make about the energy issues and the other issues, like this should be plugged in, or you could talk about plugging it in and what it should say. But these are the general, this is sort of the lay of the regulatory land and some of the gaps that we see. And yes, we can craft language that people then can look at in terms of like, well, we should make sure we're requiring this and we're requiring that. So yes, we could certainly do that. I mean, we could get you something tomorrow, but it'd be better if we could have a little time, like into the early part of next week.
I mean, if you can get just the title and like a
Yeah.
placeholder, great.
Yeah, and another suggestion would be that Ben talked about it a little bit. There's an open loop system and a closed loop system.
Yeah.
We're learning about. So open loop, my understanding is you lose 80% of the water to evaporation. So if you're drawing 300,000 gallons, you lose 80%. The rest would become thermal discharge in your open loop that's coming through. Under a closed loop system, I'm not sure how the technology works. You capture the evaporation and you reuse the water.
Yeah,
I'm sure you'd lose some, so you'd have to draw in some extra water, but it would.
it mitigates certainly.
It would really
I don't know.
reduce the water
We
use.
talked about, I don't know if it may, and I'll send you the reports that I had, which they're from, like I said, from national sort of water, think tank type groups that have looked at data center issues. And, one of the suggestions is requiring or encourage, certainly encouraging like closed loop, rather than going to like Connecticut River or certainly a groundwater withdrawal.
So
That
conservation, that promotes conservation.
Yes.
Does it reduce
You're still gonna have to.
or wastewater
That's a good question.
capacity?
I think you're still going to need all those permits. You still need a withdrawal permit. You should still do the studies. You're still going to discharge.
Yeah, it'll still be hot water.
It's
just
not
so
so much.
but it should reduce all aspects of it.
Right.
If you're keeping it flowing within the system and minimizing what's discharging out into the water, minimizing the water that needs to be added, it is something like there's evaporation. You're going to need
Yeah.
water, but you need less water. You discharge less water. And that means less impacts, obviously.
When we heard from Dr. Wren yesterday, he did show us a diagram of a closed loop, and it showed some water, condensing out the top basically. And we asked how much, what was that percentage? And I feel like he didn't. I'm not sure he knew.
I don't think it could ever be a completely closed. I don't know. I'm guessing here. I don't think it could be a completely closed loop system. I think you would lose over time to evaporation and other things. You'd have to draw water off on surface water or groundwater on a regular basis. But I think it would just.
And that's what these reports say. And I just going on the internet last night. I mean, there's a lot out there and basically saying what we're talking about. It's not, you're always going to lose some water, but it minimizes all of the need for additional water, and it reduces the discharge.
And he did say, and I don't remember the exact stat, but he said that some particularly high percentage of these were on municipal water supply.
Yeah, and
Just
that's
where
interesting to me.
his-
I did see that. I agree. And it's such, I don't know, I don't, you might want to have A&R and like the water supply people. Like I
Just
said, I
seems-
can't, have to be really large water supplies that have, like the smaller water supplies, even the medium ones don't have, like Montpelier, like Berlin Pond. I mean, this is not water. Lake Champlain, okay, yeah, I mean, I can see that. If you're going to put it in Vernon, I think they're going to try to replicate what I would imagine what Vermont Yankee did.
I think so.
The Connecticut River there's a lot of water in that part of the
And
Connecticut
Mike
River.
O'Grady talked about it a little bit. I mean, you can get your water from different sources. I mean, they need to have, bathrooms and everything else too, and that could come off the city water system, but in the meantime, they're drawing off the surface water. So but I couldn't fathom where you'd be able to put
It's hard
these and
to
just
imagine.
Yeah, it's hard
tap
to
into the
imagine.
local
I mean,
pipes.
I don't know what's happening in Virginia where there's a lot of these, what the size of their water supplies are. I mean, Vermont, obviously, we're a different scale. As we said, obviously, if you put this in Chittenden County and Lake Champlain, it's a water source the drinking water source for people in Chittenden County from Burlington, down, past Shelburne. So,
We have additional questions?
If you're talking a closed loop system, you're running it through some condensers, and condensers are going to use more power. So now a 20 megawatt facility becomes a 40 megawatt facility because of the energy itself.
I have read that. I don't know exactly how much percentage more, but
Well, I don't.
therein lies the rub. It's you're going to use more.
No, I
power,
did, right. I just look at the size of the cooling system has a effect on the load of the system to begin with. So a small system becomes a medium or large.
Yeah, and I've also read that there's systems that use air conditioning to cool. I can't fathom
Well,
how much energy that would.
yeah,
use.
I saw the air conditioning.
Yeah, that's
It-
really air conditioning.
It all
Does that
comes
work? I
down
mean,
yeah.
to
The closed loop water seems to
right.
make
It all comes down to Newton's laws.
Energy's got to come from somewhere and go somewhere.
Right. Can't be
Yeah.
created.
But again,
air
I'm
transport.
really glad that the committee's looking at this. I mean, it is a fast emerging issue, but it is obviously very, very concerning. So,
This part, somebody has to go to a different
Huh?
Yeah.
this part.
This is the first time I've testified in front of this committee. I think John too.
yes, we don't usually,
You spend a lot of
not
time.
really allowed to come here. So,
Yes, I
you-
spend a lot of time in other committees, but no, it's the first time and great to see you all. Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you much. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to getting some.
Yeah,
Talk
send
to
you those reports right away. We'll work on some.
We'll get it to you as soon as we can.
All right, thank you so much. We can go outside.
How long voting,